Yeah, so I think we'll move on to our first speakers. So that's over to Guy and John.
Thanks, Claire. I'm just going to share my screen and would ask if you can let me know when you can see it. I have been having a few technical issues because my internet's not exactly brilliant tonight. So all being well, we should be able to see this in a moment. And let me know when you can see that. That'd be brilliant.
Yeah. That's it, John.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Okay. So all being well, should be able to get through this without any major issues. I'm hoping that my internet will hold out and we'll be able to get through this. But if I'm going too fast, then please throw your hand up or shout up and say something so that you can or I can rectify that basically. Okay. So our brief for this, myself and Guy's brief for this was to go through life cycle of liver fluke, which is quite a complex life cycle, and I've cut it down to basically looking at the life cycle within the animal rather than the outside of the animal, what happens in the field, because 20 minutes I haven't got enough time to do that really, to be honest. So we want to look at what's happening within the animal and how we can control liver fluke or help control liver fluke within that animal by using the right product at the right time for the right stage of fluke. So, like I said earlier on, it is a very complex life cycle, and let me know when the picture goes through.
Yeah. You're there.
Yeah. So it is rather a complex life cycle, and what we're going to look at is this section here. We're looking at the different stages of liver fluke that are in the animal. Okay. That's what we're going to concentrate within an animal. There are different things we can do outside the animal, of course. So protecting our pasture from liver fluke. We'll talk a little bit about that later on when we're talking about different treatments. Pasture management, so we can do something about our pasture, fixing leaky troughs or avoiding poached ground or decent drainage to a certain extent. Grazing management, so keeping animals away from wet, boggy areas, and using decent electric fence to stop them going through known areas where there is a major fluke risk. And then, of course, is strategic treatment, which we'll talk about going forward. Okay, I'll just move on. Let me know we can see that guy, please.
Yeah, it's there.
Lovely. So what we're looking at here is the liver and a bit of a cross section of the liver, and animals that pick up fluke off the grass. When the fluke will go into the stomach and will end up going through the gut wall and heading off to the liver. Once it's gone off through the liver, it starts burrowing through, and here we can see a small liver, what we call a early immature liver, just starting to burrow through and head off. And its ultimate goal is to get through to the bile duct, where it matures into an adult and starts laying eggs. So really, we're generally seeing from day 0 through to about 5 weeks, where the liver fluke is burrowing through the liver and getting further and further and growing and decimating that liver as it's doing, and growing, and then eventually they become what we call an immature fluke. And the immature fluke is usually 6 to 9 weeks in age. So we generally call it 6 to 9 weeks in age, and it's heading off to the bile duct, where eventually about 10 to 12 weeks it's an adult and it starts laying eggs. Now, unfortunately for you chaps, these things lay eggs by the bucket load, up to 50,000 eggs per day. They're intermittent shedders of eggs, so they don't do it every day, but they do when they do lay eggs. They pump them out like they're going out of fashion. And of course, they're being spit out at the back end and put back on the pasture, ready for the animals to eat once they've gone through the life cycle outside. So generally, we're talking about animals getting adult fluke in them at this point by about 10 to 12 weeks. So there's a bit of a time lag on that. And I know we're looking at the moment, we're looking at some lovely weather over the last few days where it's been nice and wet and whatever, and that's absolutely perfect for our lovely mud snail, which is outside the animal, another intermediate host, to do its job and focus that life cycle through outside the animal. So if there's 50,000 eggs going out, depending on what time of the year, and this is, I'm sure we're all going to talk about this later on, as with this year, we've had a dry spell at the beginning of the year, and then it became wet. So I suspect that some of the treatments that had already happened by now have probably been too early, and we need to just rectify and make sure that we're using our vets to test and make sure that there is an active fluke infection there. And Rosie's going to touch on that in the next presentation, because it's vitally important that we get that right, because treating animals that haven't got a problem there is a waste of a treatment, and a waste of your money as well, for that matter. Okay, so what type of actives do we have?
John,
There are many different actives, or let me yes, sorry, Guy.
I was going to say, John, just before you move on, I know we've got everybody muted, but it might just be worth at this point seeing if everybody's able to use the chat button, just so we'll test the waters with it, but just to see if anybody gets abattoir data that sort of sees the sort of what state the livers are in from the abattoir, and just to get a feel of who does that, and just put yes in the chat button if you do that, get the data.
That's a really good point, Guy, because that's free information. If you are sending them into the abattoirs, it's totally not free information, and yeah, absolutely get as much as that information as you can do, because you know that will help you decide whether you've got a fluke infection or not.
Well, do you know what? There's been, I don't know if you can see that, John, but there's been a good 6 or 7 yeses. Yeah, we don't get livers back if there is a problem.
Yeah, use that data in conjunction. Use that data in conjunction with testing and what have you. It's really good data.
Well, you just, people rely on data, don't you? Really, you know what's going on then, so it's a good place to be. But it's also good just to check that everybody knows how to use the chat button, and it seems that's the case. So we'll keep using that. Cheers, John. Sorry.
Excellent stuff. Right, now, lovely. Well, we'll move on then. So I suppose I've got a question really now, but you don't need to. You can put it in the chat room if you want, about the different types of products that are available on the market. And when I say different types of products, there's lots of different types, but there are only a few active ingredients. And I think this is where people get a little bit more confused at times. So just Guy, just give me a shout when you can see it's moved on.
Yeah, moved on, yeah.
Super. So what we're looking at here is a chart of the different products that are available. And yes, okay, it has a few of our trade names in there because we're Elanco, and we're not going to not do our trade names in there. So, but when we look at the kill rates for different products that are on the market, there are lots of different products, and they have different kill rates as well, whether it be sheep or cattle. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got the sheep efficacy charts for sheep, and on the right-hand side, the efficacy charts for cattle. So if we take a look at this product here, which we call it Fasinex, essentially it's triclobendazole. So it's one of the active ingredients is called triclobendazole, and triclobendazole in sheep will kill all 3 stages down to 2-day-old. So we're looking at adult, we're looking at immature, and we're also looking at early immature. Okay. When we look a little bit closer at Closanto, which is the next product down, that will kill down to about 5-week-old liver fluke in the animal. Now, products on the market that are Closanto, the likes of Fluke Iver. We do have a product called Superverm as well, but that includes a wormer. But I will stress at this point, if you don't need to use a wormer, then do not use a wormer, just use a Fluke-side. And again, down to good testing in conjunction with your vets, who will tell you whether you need a wormer as well. And then we've got another product here called nitroxinil that kills down to about 7-week-old. That's most commonly known as a product called Trodax, not our product. I don't mind talking about it because it's part of your armory. If you need to use it, it's there for you to use. And it's really important that you know about it. And then there are various different products that kill adult only. So oxyclosinide, that'll be the likes of a product called Zanil, and albendazole is essentially white wormer. So we do a product called Ricoben, which is ricobendazole, and that will kill adult fluke given at the correct dose rate. So we're talking about, well, with Ricoben, it's a dose and a half what the normal dose rate is for worms. So the message here really is we've got lots of different products on the market. Some of them kill adults, some of them kill adults and some immature, but there's really only one that kills all 3 stages: adult, immature and early immature. And that goes for cattle as well. Again, when we're looking at the cattle side of things, we call it Fazanex 240, but it's triclobendazole again. This is a product that will kill down to 2 weeks liver fluke in the animal. So slightly different than the sheep, 2 weeks in cattle, 2 days in sheep. And then of course we've got nitroxinol, which is your Trodax again, and we've got Closanto, which will be likes of closamectin, and lots of different other ones that will kill adult only. It's really important that we understand that there's 3 different stages of liver fluke in the animal, and there are lots of different products, and those different products will kill different stages in those animals. Okay.
I think, John, before you move on, I think it's just important to say that this chart isn't a guide as to how good a product is. It's just a guide as to what the product does. They're all passed and they're all very good products, but it's just a guide as to what time of year you should be using these products. So you look at triclobendazole there, you look at the Fazanex, and that goes down to 2-day-old fluke. That's perfect for certain times of the year. So starting around sort of now, just depending on the challenge and that. But the other products work just as well as any of the others. But it's just to guide us to, you shouldn't be using the one that does down to 2-day-old fluke all the time, because there might not be the early immature fluke there at the time. So I think it's just important to mention that one as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Guy. There, and I think there's an element of as you know, those folk that actually made the worming session we did a month or so ago. It's really important that we do swap the products around and don't use the same product all the time, just like as it is with our worming protocols. The same with liver fluke. But when I say swap the products around, making sure with liver fluke that it's the right time of the year for the right product, because that's really, really important. And like I say, you can't do any worse than going and getting some of these testing done. And Rose is going to cover that in the next session, because you know, I do believe this year we've already had far too many doses that will have gone into animals that didn't need to. So
I'm
the
just,
next slide
just get a message, John, as well.
Yep.
Just a quick one before. Sorry to disturb. Just before I carry on, that it's quite difficult to read those slides because it's got the next slide on the right hand side. Is there any way of making it full screen just for that slide? Or
I thought that should have been. Sorry, I thought that should have been full sleeves, full slide. Apologies. Let me just try that a second. No, that's not good. I was under the impression you could see all of that then. Just give me a moment. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's full screen. Yeah. still a little bit blurry, but it's good. It's better.
Apologies, I've been going through that thinking that you could see the whole screen, and I've been churning away thinking that you could see it all. I do apologise about that. So
That's all right.
So yes, do I need to go through that again, or is everybody happy with the fact that we've got 3 different types of, or lots of different types of product that kill different stages?
Yeah, I think we can see that now. We've not really missed anything. We saw the big red crosses.
Right. Okay, no problem. Right, so moving on, and this isn't by any means, this isn't a hard and fast rule, because it all depends on the weather. It depends on how much of a fluke challenge you get, and that depends on your farm. So this isn't, it's just giving you a guideline to this, and I can't stress enough about getting animals tested to see whether you actually need to use products in the first place. So thinking about our previous slide we were talking about covering all 3 stages of liver fluke. So here we had our early immatures, and we've got our immatures, and we've also got our adult above the autumn, early winter stage. So at that point, probably you would be thinking about using the one product that's available, which is triclobendazole, and using that. But again, it depends on the time of year and the weather and so on and so forth. So testing is really, really vital. When we move into late winter and early spring, at that point we haven't got any, or probably shouldn't have any, early immatures in those animals. So there's no point in using triclobendazole at that point. You could use either the closantel or the nitroxinil, which kills these 2 stages of liver fluke, so the adult and immature. And then one that could be a possibility to help you with your pasture contamination is a late spring, early summer. You could use an adulticide, so like the white drench at a dose and a half, which depending on which one, or oxyclotinide, Xanil, which is out there as well. So you could actually stop those adults at that point, again depending on the type of year and the amount of challenge that you generally see on your farm, and testing for that matter. With that one, a lot of people don't think about that, but these adult fluke are the ones that are putting the eggs out in the pasture that will affect you in autumn, early winter. So even if you can take just a number of those out, it would probably help with your autumn, early winter hassle from liver fluke in the first place. Okay, how are we doing for time? Because I can't see time now, guys.
There's just not too bad. There's just a question: what age?
You've got, sorry, Guy, you've got about 3.5 minutes.
Oh. Okay, there's a quick question. What age do you start seeing visible fluke in the liver at slaughter?
Oh, no, that's a good point. Maybe Rose will be able to answer that one next, because I'm not just quite sure myself. Yeah. I thought it was from well, any damage. As soon as you start damage, you'll be able to know that there's fluke there. But it depends on whether you could see it. I don't know.
Historical damage as well. Yeah.
It depends on the amount of burden. So if there's a lot of immatures ingested, then they'll cause much more damage than just 1 or 2.
Yeah. Thank you, Rosie.
I think, like you say, John, it's just important to say there's no hard and fast rule as to sort of when you're going to get immatures or early immatures, because that on that screen, for example, late winter and spring, if you've got a really mild winter, they might still be picking up fluke, and you might still get the early immatures later on. So it's all to do with the next part of the presentation, which is all about testing and seeing what's there, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt about it, and that's, you know, it's really, really important, because I'm aghast by the amount of product that's already been used this year, and I just feel it's been a waste of product, and that's why we try and push this as much as possible, testing for a startup, but also, you know, go back on. There's a really good website, Nardis, that also put up fluke warnings and such like, but you know, use that information with your abattoir data, with your testing with your vets, and you know, you can make a reasonable assumption then of when you're going to get a liver fluke problem, and then you're not wasting money, because the days of you know, we always used to do this on such and such a date have gone, I'm afraid, because you know, the parasites that we've been dealing with have changed, and they changed with the weather. You know, so yeah, it's really important. So we obviously do lots and lots of different products, and I'm just going back to just to highlight again, using that correct product. Triclobendazole kills all 3 stages. Plazantel kills adult and immature, and your white drench or ricobendazole will kill just your adults. Just highlighting that again so that you understand that there are 3 stages, and there are lots of different products that kill different stages of liver fluke in the liver. One good other thing as well, we do have a website called Farm Animal Health, which pretty much has a lot of information that you can access. It's free to use, free information. We're giving you something for nothing. Fantastic. But yeah, anybody can go on Farm Animal Health, and you can actually you can sign up to our Parasite Matters. Now, Parasite Matters doesn't talk about product. It talks about what's coming up in the next 3 months. So it gives you a bit of an understanding of what you should be looking for to help out over the next 3 months, and they come out quarterly. So just something else to help you out with information, basically. So I think with that, I'm pretty much done from my bit of the presentation. I'd have loved to have done a bit on the outside the animal as well, but we could have spent the morning doing that, really, I think, to be honest. So I'll stop sharing now, and then we can move on to Rosie, or questions, whichever you want. Probably Rosie, I suspect. And thanks for that.
Thank you, John, and thanks, Guy, for that. You've perfect timing. That's my stop clock going off. So yes, fantastic, thank you. I think there are several questions popping up, but I think we'll carry on, if that's all right, if everyone's happy with that, and maybe some of the questions might get answered in the next talk. So yeah, with that, we'll pass over to Rosie. Thank you.
Unmute myself. Right, hello. Thank you very much for inviting us, Claire, and the Farmer Network. So today's topic was fighting the liver fluke challenge. As Claire kindly introduced, my name's Rosie. I'm a farm animal vet at Bishopton Vets in North Yorkshire, and I have a special interest in sheep and pathology. So this liver here was from a post-mortem that I did on Friday. I didn't specifically tell it to die to produce me a nice picture, but it's got us a good picture there to give us an example. Now, this came from a very fluky farm, and there wasn't any evidence of liver fluke at this point. So my aims of today, it might be to give you more questions than I answer, I'm afraid. But what I'd like you to do is take away some of these questions and have a think about how they apply to your farm, because every farm is unique, and you'll see why that is as we go through this presentation. So, do you have liver fluke on your farm? Have a think. Do you think that you do? Do you know that you do? Well, my neighbour says they have a problem. So does that mean I have a problem? Well, if your neighbour has an issue, then that does suggest that the climatic conditions are correct, that mean that the fluke life cycle can be complete. But your neighbouring farm could be in a bog, and they could have sheep grazing down by riverbanks a lot longer than you have your sheep grazing. So your neighbour may have a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a problem. We always lose lambs every autumn. So this is one that I always hear when I come to do Red Tractor reviews. But why do you lose lambs every autumn? It's very easy to say, oh, well, I think, you know, lambs like to die, or I think it might have just been a bit of this or a bit of fluke or a bit of that. But if we're not post-morteming those animals, we don't know why they've died. And I'll go into how valuable postmortems are in a little while, but just looking at APHA data in the east of the country, parasitic gastroenteritis, so worms, Clostridial disease and Pasteurella are the 3 top reasons why lambs die, and Fluke isn't up there. Now in the west, this is a different kettle of fish, and Fluke is up there. So my farm is very wet and boggy. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have Fluke established in your snail population, and it also doesn't mean that you graze all the wet and boggy land. So you may not have Fluke. I don't know, but I don't want to risk not treating my flock. But this comes back to our conversation about treating the flock, but maybe treating them too early or with the wrong product. And we lead ourselves into this false sense of security that, you know, we know that's one job ticked off, we're safe. But actually, are we safe? These products don't have persistent action. So once you've treated, what's inside the sheep is killed, but anything picked up the next day or 3 weeks later will be there, and the treatment doesn't affect what's picked up after treatment. And we've had some abattoir liver condemnations. Now this is an interesting one, and the only reason I put it up is because I had a farm who told me that he had abattoir liver condemnations, and he told me that he had Fluke. I haven't found any other evidence of Fluke on his farm, and we went through his abattoir reports, and what we were seeing was they were contaminated livers. So they were contaminated by the process of slaughtering, or they'd been damaged during the slaughtering process, or they had abscesses on them, but they didn't have, well, from the report, it didn't say that they had evidence of liver Fluke. So there's some key words that you'll look for when we talk about abattoir condemnations, and I'll mention them as we go through the presentation. So my question to you then is there evidence of liver Fluke on your farm? So we can look for evidence of liver Fluke in 2 ways. So we can be carrying out passive surveillance all the time. So what I mean by passive surveillance is stuff that goes on in the background. So that's regular postmortems of fallen stock. And it doesn't necessarily have to be directly looking at liver Fluke, but we recommend to farms that you post-mortem fallen stock anyway. So while we're in there, the vet will have a look at the liver. Yep, that liver's clean. You know, it provides that extra nugget of information. And farmers sometimes get frustrated that we don't get a diagnosis when we do a post-mortem. I can understand that, but what we do learn is a wealth of knowledge about that carcass that might mean that we know they don't have liver Fluke, we know that it hasn't died of Pasteurella, we know it hasn't got worms. So although we may not get the reason why it's died, we've learned a lot of background information that we can use for our benefit. And then talking about abattoir feedback again, this is something that's really, really valuable, but it's trying to understand how they word things. So things like acute fasciolosis, they use technical terms. That means there's an acute liver Fluke infection. Chronic fasciolosis means that what they've found is thickening within the bile ducts, and that's something that's been going on a longer time. And sometimes they say cirrhosis. This doesn't necessarily have to be linked with Fluke, but it means that the liver's scarred, and often that is historic Fluke. So what I would suggest is the next time you see a vet, pull out your abattoir feedback and go through it with them to help decipher some of those, to check whether it means that you've got liver Fluke or not. So all of this post-mortem talk and abattoir talk is great, but you require the animal to be dead. So this isn't much use to anyone really, a dead lamb. So what can we do in live animals to detect this? And this is where it requires us to do some active surveillance. So this is something that we'll have to get up and do. Now, the best way to do surveillance is two means. And the first means is blood sampling. So blood sampling, we can do two types of blood sampling. So we can look, so one of the ways is looking for the enzymes that are produced when the liver is damaged. Now, this is great for one animal, but it's not specific to Fluke. So if a vet comes to see one specific animal and they can't work out what's going on, then they may take a blood and they may say that the liver enzymes are increased and we think it's liver fluke, but it's not a definitive diagnosis. Now, blood sampling lambs is a great way of detecting evidence of liver fluke infection. So when a lamb is born, it obviously ingests colostrum, and by the time it's sort of 16 weeks old, any antibodies that have been passed from the mother to the lamb in colostrum have disappeared. Now, after this age, so 4 months old, what we can start to do is blood sample these lambs to look for evidence of liver fluke infection. Now, because these lambs have never been exposed before, because they were born this year, we can detect when the lamb is exposed to it through looking for antibodies. So what that means is if a lamb is exposed to liver fluke, 2 to 4 weeks after it's exposed, we can detect antibodies in its blood. So I'll explain how we can use this as a tool and how Excel Vets used this as a tool last year to do some fluke surveillance. The other way of testing is fecal samples, so the good old collecting poo samples. Now we have two types of options for this, and this is doing your standard poo count, so collecting poo samples. Ideally for this it would be a selection of different animals, so you'd go to a group and collect 10 individual samples and then send them in separate bags, and they will get pulled at the lab and get tested. So we can only do that when there's adults established within the liver and they're producing eggs, so that takes 10 to 12 weeks. Now, there is a different test, and that's called the copper antigen test. Now, what that does is it detects bits of fluke DNA in the poo, and we can do this test slightly earlier. So this can be done 2 to 3 weeks earlier. So post-infection, we can use the copper antigen test to detect 8 weeks onwards, and the standard fecal egg count we can detect sort of 10 to 12 weeks onwards. And these tests are the ones that we are using to test for trichobandazoa resistance. So just this is quite a neat way of explaining how blood sampling young lambs can help show where fluke challenge is. And I'm not going to go into this too much because this is what the the North Sheep Hill group have been doing. So I don't want to steal Kate's whole presentation, but what we did at Excel Vets is we took 25 farms from 24 practices with a distribution across the UK. Now it seems like a lot more Excel Vets are on the west coast rather than the east coast, So we didn't get any results from sort of Norfolk and Lincolnshire, but there's not as many sheep around there. What we did was we took 6 lambs from 25 farms that we knew had a liver fluke problem. We started blood sampling those lambs in July, and we blood sampled them every month. Now, we kept blood going back to the farm and blood sampling them until we had a positive result. And once we got a positive result, then we used that to determine treatments. So once we got the positive result, then that suggested that the lambs were exposed and that flock treated the flock. That flock got treated. So what was really interesting about this project was that one farm had seroconverted in August, and only 11 farms had seroconverted by December. So you can see on that previous map, all the red dots are where had positives by December, and the rest of the places didn't have a positive. So our one in Bishopton, we didn't get a positive. So what that illustrates is, you know, usually these sheep will have been treated, say, pre-tupping with a triclobenzol treatment. They may have also been treated again since then. And for those farms that didn't have positives, this would have been a waste of money and a waste of time. So, as I said before, each farm is different, and therefore it has its own unique fluke risk. So, is there snail habitat on your farm? So, this picture on the left of your screen is some classic fluke habitat. You know, damp areas, bare mud, lacking some vegetation cover. It could be around leaky troughs. It could be on streams, on bank sides. This lovely plant gives away the boggy nature of the ground, the reed. So this is prime mud snail habitat. Now, having this habitat doesn't necessarily mean that you've got liver fluke within your population of snails, but having this habitat means that there potentially is, well, there will be snails on your farm. So the next thing that we need to think about is there the climatic conditions to allow the external life cycle to be complete? Now, the external life cycle, again, we don't want to go into too much detail, but from the egg, from the eggs passed out onto the pasture, the egg, when it's got the correct climatic conditions, so that's over 10 degrees, hatches out, and the stage that hatches out, and it can only survive very short amount of time on the pasture, it's a myricidium, and that moves into the snail. So if we don't have snails there, eggs can land on the pasture, but they never get into a snail because there's no snails there. Now, if we have eggs on the pasture, the correct climatic conditions, and the snails there, then these can move into the snail. Now, within the snail, this multiplies and multiplies, and then in the correct climatic conditions, so warm and wet, these snails multiply them up and then pass out something called a cercaria onto the pasture. Now, this forms then into an encysted stage, and this is what's ingested by the lambs, and this is quite resilient in the environment. So these are passed out and can be ingested over periods of time. So the guys from Elanco mentioned the NADIS fluke forecasting model. This is useful, and certainly this is one of the Met Office fluke forecasting models that they use. And as you can see, the rainfall in the west is significantly greater than the rainfall in the east. So it may mean that the risk in the west is different to the risk in the east. And I know that the risk in the west is higher. So then finally, if we've got the environment, we've got the climatic conditions for the life cycle to be complete, do we have the stock grazing the areas to then pick these encysted cercariae off the pasture and ingest them and cause disease? So if we're grazing dry land that doesn't have fluke habitat, then those animals are probably not at risk. But if these lovely tups here, if they were down the riverbank and they were grazing on stuff like this in the middle of the summer or later on this year, then potentially they could be picking up fluke. And what we need to remember as well is, even if we control the disease and manage the grazing strategy and manage the environment, we can still have wildlife reservoirs for fluke. And regardless of your control, deers and rabbits can act as an untreated reservoir. So talking about strategic quarantine treatment then, so you guys had a session on wormers, and hopefully you came away from that meeting with the idea that you needed to get yourself a really good quarantine protocol in place to prevent you buying in resistant worms. Now, this is something that we want to do in the fluke as well, and therefore what we don't want to be doing is buying in fluke and buying in resistant fluke. So if you're a farm, so after all of these conversations, hopefully you may have an idea of where you fit in these profiles. So if your farm has no snail habitat and you've got no evidence of fluke, then if you buy a sheep in with fluke, what is going to be the risk to yourself? Well, if this sheep has fluke, it might pass out fluke eggs onto the pasture. There's no snails there, and there's no habitat there to complete the life cycle, so the fluke is only significant for that animal that's been bought in. So for this one, we could use a triclobendazole treatment. Say you were buying animals in the autumn, we could use a triclobendazole treatment to clear out any fluke that are in the animal that may cause production limiting disease. And we're not too concerned about any eggs going out onto the pasture because we don't have the habitat or fluke there. Now, the second one is, yes, I have snail habitat, but I haven't found any evidence of fluke. So our risk is that we buy in an infected sheep and they infect our snails, and then your farm goes from a farm that has the environment to potentially have liver fluke to having liver fluke. So for these guys, what we're trying to do is also avoid introducing resistant fluke into the snail population. So we're not going to use triclobendazole to treat these guys. We're going to buy them in and treat them with closantel. So that's going to kill down to 5 weeks. Now, if there's any adults there, they'll shed eggs out for 3 weeks. So this sheep here, we want to put that on our safest pasture from fluke habitat, to prevent any eggs being shed out into the environment that potentially could infect the snails. And what you would do is, if you closanteled them now, you'd want to repeat that again in 6 weeks to make sure that any immatures that were left when you treated them are now treated. And then finally, this snail habitat with evidence of endemic fluke on your farm. So our risk is, we buy a sheep in, we've already got fluke. So, well, my snails have already got fluke. What's the problem? Well, the problem is if we buy triclobendazole resistant Fluke in, then we could put triclobendazole resistant Fluke in our snail population, and it might mean that that doesn't work in the future. So again, I would suggest a similar path of treatment with something like closantel. Now, ideally, what you want to be doing with this is you want to be going and coming up with a plan with your vet to get a quarantine treatment that suits your farm. And that's not just for Fluke, but it's for resistant worms, it's for foot rot, it's for other infectious diseases. So that's something that you can come up, a plan you can come up with your vet. Now, finally, hopefully I've not overrun too much, is just thinking to the future. What is the future of Fluke control? And I just wanted to get this in. There was 2 studies done that looked at how they thought the climate was going to affect the Fluke challenge in the future. And what they came up with is that the Fluke risk will increase in the future. And what will be significant is that due to climate change, our weather patterns are going to be less predictable, and therefore the challenge will be more variable, and our classic dosing at certain times of the year may all go to the pot. So we really need to establish what's going on our farms, how we can avoid grazing areas if we need, and stopping infection coming into our farms if we don't have it. Now, environmental schemes potentially are the way forward in the uplands, but a lot of these schemes encourage us to have boggy, wet areas and graze our sheep on them. So there's going to be certain times where the Fluke risk is unavoidable. So we need to really be on the ball with that. And just thinking forward, DEFRA have introduced this new animal health and welfare pathway that's coming in, and payment by results. Now, we don't have a lot more information about this, but the idea is that they're trying to tackle endemic disease, and liver fluke is one of those endemic diseases. So it'd be interesting to see whether that's included in this pathway. And then finally, there's an upland resilience project going on, and what they're doing is looking at how resilient upland farms would be to changes in the climate. And liver fluke is one of those significant factors that may mean that a farm that's not so resilient will become unproductive if we get the effects of climate change and we can't control the fluke challenge. So finally, I'm sorry that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but this just highlights the importance of all working together to understand and tackle this disease. So I can't stress enough that go and seek out a sheep vet who's passionate about these things and come up with a plan for your flock. They'll be more than happy to help.
Thank you, Rosie. That was great. We've had a few questions on the chat, but we'll keep going if that's all right. I think Kate's presentation is sort of more of a discussion-based one as well. So hopefully we should soon be able to answer your questions that you've sent on the chat. But I've got them all in front of me, so we won't miss any. So yeah, over to Kate. Thank you.
Can you see that, Claire?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can, Kate. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I think what we've just heard from John and Guy and Rosie just shows how complex the liver fluke life cycle is, and how the testing procedures, you know, there's a big choice of those, and there's a big choice of products, and added into that mix in a hill farming situation, you've also got the, as a lot of you'll know who are on this meeting tonight, the issue with hill farming is that you're only gathering your sheep several times a year, so maybe only 5 or 6 times a year. So how does that affect what are those interventions you can make, like any testing or when you decide to treat, and how that varies. Also, when you're grazing in a shared fell or common situation or a moor, then your animals are going into lots of different habitats and environments, and it's not like wet boggy areas in your fields that you can fence off. That's not so easy in a fell or open common situation. So all of those things led to the formation of this project. One of the main reasons was through those of you who are already Farmer Network members know that a few years ago we did a project called Farm Trials, with farmers saying what things that they would like to know more about and look at on their own farms. And the biggest issue, this was 2017, was Fluke. And so we, as we do at the Farmer Network, we worked away with other partners and tried to get together a project that would enable us to be able to do that. Thankfully, with the help of Amanda Carson, who works for AFA, which is also part of the Yorkshire Agricultural Society Farmer Scientist Network, helped us to put in a bid for some European money to really sort of tackle the problem from the hill farmers situation. And we got the funding and started in 2018, which is when, well, our first year of actually working with the farmers was 2018. And of course, that was one of the driest years on record. And after, well, I don't know, 8 or 10 years of serious fluke problems, we had the drought. So that has affected what we've been able to do in the project. But basically, this slide just sets out what we've done. So I'll just quickly go through that. As it says on the screen, we had 2 farmer groups, one in Cumbria and one in Yorkshire Dales, and we've had about 12 farmers in each group. Some have been more actively involved with coming to the meetings and getting involved in things than others, but we've had input from all of those from the start. And what we've done is have well, 2 farmer meetings per year for each of the groups, where we've had discussions, and sometimes we've had guest speakers who have been sheep health specialists, some looking at like the environment, others looking at the research that they're doing into snail habitat and fluke, the efficacy of different drugs. And we've also, in the Cumbria and the Yorkshire group, had the local vets have done post-mortem workshops with farmers and helped them to be able to do that sort of quick and dirty identification for whether there is a fluke problem in the liver, or I've just encouraged them to cut out the relevant bits and take them down to the vets to get them analysed. The other key element of this project has been that we've been working with lots of different expertise. So we've had, as I mentioned, Amanda Carson with her animal and plant health authority head on about sort of surveillance. And then we've partnered up with the University of Liverpool, and they've obviously done a lot of research on fluke, and the Royal Veterinary College, and Bryony Jones, who's joining us in the meeting tonight. She's a sort of veterinary epidemiologist, and so part of this project was designed to help us work with her, because she's got a lot of experience of participatory epidemiology, which means farmers sharing their information and learning from each other as well as from other specialists. So trying to sort of tap into the local knowledge and help us all to share that and see if we can get a sort of benefit from that. Because I think, like Rosie mentioned earlier, sometimes if your neighbour will have maybe similar problems but not exactly the same, and sometimes sharing what's going on in your farm or the things that have been successful for you might help somebody else, and vice versa. Sometimes, as we've said, all of this is really complex, and I know I quite often have real sort of light bulb moments when you sort of see something, and I think like that last presentation of Rosie's with those 3 columns of these are the 3 different things that you're dealing with. You know, sometimes there's just something that helps you to think, oh yeah, right, okay, so maybe if I did that test, or yeah, well, do I really have habitat? I don't really know. It's like, it just helps you to think about things differently sometimes by talking about it with other people and other specialists. But that's been the sort of purpose of this project, to do that. And as part of the project, quite often, you know, you can say, oh yeah, well, this is how I treat my sheep and this is how I decide whether to fluke them or not. But quite often, as we all know, you've got that data somewhere on a bit of paper in your diary or actually in your medicine book, but it's really hard to just look at that and be able to get a picture of what's going on. And so as part of the project, we worked with the veterinary evidence group, who work on veterinary software and tools that help with animal health. And they designed a special mobile phone app for us that enables farmers who want to use it, that they can put all their information on about their different fluke treatments. And we also included scab in this, just to so that you can look back and see what's happened. And also, I'll go into this later in this presentation, but you can, by using the data, you can sort of see more easily what's going on or reflect on what you've been treating animals with over a period. So that's the sort of data collection. And then, oh, and also we did this baseline questionnaire so that we knew where everybody was at the start in sort of 2017. And then the other thing that we've concentrated on is we secured some money for this project to do testing. So we offered free fecal egg count testing and also the copper antigen testing. And then just recently, just this year, trying to build on the project that Rosie described, the Sentinel project, to offer it to our participant farmers this year to see what was going on, because we, like everybody else, I assume, we're really surprised that fluke wasn't appearing in those blood tests until, you know, December last year, and that surprised everybody, I think, really. So the other test that we've offered is the fecal egg count reduction test, which uses egg counts to help you work out whether your the fluke in your sheep is resistant to triclobendazole. So I'm not going to obviously go into all of that detail, but if anybody wants, I'm sure you might have questions about that perhaps that's in the meeting can answer. And just to say that this European funding has been really helpful, and obviously it would have been more helpful if we'd had it a couple of years earlier, but that's how it goes, isn't it? So this just summarises really what I've said. Farmers are learning from each other's experiences, and obviously the farmers in the Lake District are in a much wetter climate and have probably been using flukicides more often more regularly and have got a warmer, wetter climate than perhaps the farmers who are more based on the Pennines. But here are the photos of the two groups. Obviously the Cumbrian one's on the top photo, and then we've been meeting at Askrigg with the Yorkshire group, but also on farms and doing the postmortems. Just one other thing that we've been doing is feeding back information to SCOPS, the Sustainable Control of Parasites in Sheep, because I don't know how many of you have seen their materials, but there's quite a lot of different materials out there on, you know, helping you with the life cycle and helping you with the groups. And I must say that those pictures that John put up earlier just are really, you know, help all of us to understand the different groups and which stages of the life cycle that they treat. So that's been helpful, and we've asked the group what they found most useful as tools. So that's given us some useful information to share amongst ourselves as farmers, but also we've been able to feed stuff back so that maybe things can be clearer or more, you know, incorporate more of the issues. And the other element of this project has been, we've recently had a student who's been doing her MSc, and she interviewed farmers about their what they think has been the value of these groups and being able to focus on a topic like this. And she interviewed the Cumbria group over the summer. She was wanting to do it face to face, but obviously she had to do it over the phone or Zoom. So I'll give you some more details about that. But this is a bit more information about this mobile phone app that was created and that farmers have been using. And sometimes people have needed a bit of help to get used to it and get on board with it. And our coordinators, Carol and Vicky Slater, who's also on the call, have been really helpful helping people to do that, and also to backdate a lot of data from the medicine books. So that's just given us a bigger picture of when animals have been treated, which products have been used, which type of sheep have been treated. So, you know, the tucks or the shearlings or the lambs. And why, the reasons for treating. That's part of you know, what you put into the app. You say why, and then hopefully that might give us, you know, us and you and your vet a better picture of, you know, what's going on. So yeah, on the screen it actually, you know, allows you to look back and see what you've treated when and why you treated it, and which you know, which product it was. And then also you can add in cost, you know, the cost of each dose, and then it gives you an idea about how much you've been spending on it as well. And if you've been able to save a dose by, as John was saying, waiting until you know that there's Fluke's actually there and which life stage it's at, then, you know, summarising that is you know, really helps you to sort of stand back and think how much you are spending on that sort of thing. And then, so all that information's gone in, and then there's I think his or her own data, and also the sort of combined data of the group, so you can see what are the most common treatments at certain times of year, what are the main reasons for treating, and which groups have been treated at different times of year. So I know that looks really complicated there when you can't really see exactly what's going on, but it's just an idea that it gives the farmers involved in the group and their vets a tool, and it makes putting all that data in worthwhile, because obviously that's a bit of a job. But like you can see on here, for instance, on this reasons for treatment, in this case, most of the reasons for treatment were routine treatments 25 times, and the test, this is over 3 years, the test, they've only used a test once to decide whether to treat. So I'll just keep moving, and then we've got more time for questions and discussion. This is just another of the graphs from the tableau, showing, you know, which drug was used at different times. So like the green one is closantel, and the orange one is oxyclosanide, which I think is similar to the closantel. And then the blue's albendazole, and the pale blue is nitroxanil, and then triclobendazole is the red one, which obviously you can see when that's mainly being used. But you can see that was 2017's figures, and this is 2018, and then this is 2019, that the amount of treatments has gone down, partly because of what I was saying earlier about, and obviously you all know about the weather. So just to go on to some of the feedback that Catherine, who was the MSc student, sort of got together for doing her interviews. These were her main findings of the effects of being part of a farmer group for the farmers. And they said that they were managing Fluke better, but it was still a problem. An improved awareness of fluticide resistance and how to manage it, and the challenges of collecting samples, waiting for results, and dosing at the right time. And as we said, that's particularly bad. Well, just adds another layer of complexity for hill farmers. And here's a quote from one of the farmers, which hopefully you can all see. Just summarising the issue of having, you know, just having to gather, you know, having certain times when you're gathering the animals, and once you've got them in, the temptation is to routinely treat because you don't know when you're going to see them again. But as has been said in the two previous presentations, if the fluke aren't there, then that treatment's not going to help them once they get back to the fell, because it's not treating anything, because none of the drugs like act in a forward way unless you know, they're not going to, don't get into anything too technical, Kate, but they're not going to help later, you know, 2 weeks later. So going on to the next main point from the discussions was, yeah, people, the farmers, explaining how, you know, it has been useful to be able to cut out the dose, and that they've picked up things from sharing. So hopefully that just sort of reinforces what the previous two speakers have said about, you know, managing all of those different things, and some of the tools and some of the different resources that we've been able to, that we've tried out and that we've shared as part of the group meetings are available on the project website, the Hill Sheep Health North. So, you know, you can go on there and have a look. Hopefully there will be more stuff coming on over the next 6 months as the project comes to a close. And I'm sure some of the farmers who were in the meeting, including Carol and Vicky and Kevin, Peter and Lawrence, might be able to join it, will be able to join in the discussion and the questions and answers. I don't know if Carol, you want to say anything about collecting information to go on the app. I can't see Carol.
Yeah. So I was sort of helping farmers sort of G them up really to put the information on. I think at first farmers found it quite fiddly. To start with, it was kind of getting the app sorted onto their phone or tablet, or even into their laptop. So it was a case of sort of setting them up with it at first, and then it was just a case of G'ing them up to put the information in, because obviously without that information, that dashboard wouldn't be of use to anybody. So it's really great that everybody puts the information on and keeps it up to date, because it's a really good reminder of what product you used last year or when the last time you treated, just to kind of have it there in front of you on your phones. Really useful, instead of sort of trawling through your medicine book and what have you. So I think that's been useful for farmers. Testing wise, sort of with my farmer hat on, it's been great really, because it gives you a real good indication of what the fluke burden is at that particular time. I know last year, instead of us routinely treating now before we sort of loused the tubs, we missed it and held off treating them until we actually got a positive test result. So that was a good way of kind of looking at it. And unfortunately, because, well, it wasn't unfortunate really, but it's unfortunate for this project in particular, because it's been so dry, we haven't really had the results. We've kind of been sort of wanting to find out whether we've got triclobendazole resistance, because there's not been any fluke eggs there to kind of do the egg reduction tests. So there's good things and bad things about it. So it's just good that we've had a good break with the weather and been able to have a break from fluke.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, here, I'm sure everybody will say the same. Thanks, Carol. Yeah, so I think that's the end of our presentation. Claire, if you want to open it up for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate, and thanks, Carol. That was great. Thank you very much to both of you. It's nice to hear what's happening with that project. It's I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions sort of towards the end of the project, and you maybe be doing like a roundup of what you've done, and I would imagine a lot of farmers will want to hear sort of the final results from that. And I'd like personally be interested to know if you could sort of add up the cost savings, you know, sort of find out exactly how much they've all saved. It'd be really great. Sorry, John and Guy, you'll have to close your ears at that point. So yeah, so we've got plenty.
It's got to be right.
We've got plenty of questions on the chat, so if everybody's happy, I'll go through those first, and then if anyone else has got something they would rather ask in physically ask rather than type into the chat, we'll do those at the end. So we've got, so I think the question that was about the seeing visible signs in the liver at slaughter, I think Rosie sort of answered that one, didn't you, Rosie, in the little intermittent bit between the two talks. So I think we've answered that one. So the next one after that was, what signs can we look for in the animal other than a puffy jawline? So Rosie, do you want to do that one?
Yeah, so the clinical signs can vary. So if we've got real high burdens and acute infection, we can just see sudden death. Then going on into sort of subclinical disease, we see sort of evidence of liver disease. Now, the liver produces the proteins that keep the fluid within the blood vessels. So the signs that we tend to see is this sort of bottly jar and an animal going sort of thin and looking poor. Now, a chronic animal may not look as bad as that, so we may only see very marginal signs, but what we don't see is the invisible cost of it. So the production limiting factors. So that might be, you know, if we've got chronic disease at lambing time, those ewes don't produce enough milk, and that impacts on lamb viability, and then on to how well those lambs go on. So it may look quite simple just from the outside, but it can have a huge impact on productivity. And I think they estimate it to be sort of £3 to £5 a lamb, the cost of liver fluke.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Next one, now that we are aware of resistance to Fazinex type products and have been avoiding using it for more than once a year, has the product become more effective again? That was from Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. John and Guy, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can cover that one. If you've got a resistance and it's to triclobendazole, then unfortunately that ain't going to change. It will stay resistant to triclobendazole. It will depend on how bad that resistance is, and it's a difficult one, this one, because obviously we sell triclobendazole, we also sell clozantol and so on and so forth. But the simple fact of the matter is, if it's there and you've got resistance, just like in worms, if it's already the product, or let me rephrase that, the fluke have already become resistant to that product you're using, then you're probably not going to be able to use that to its full potential and full effectiveness, as long as you've got animals on your farm, unfortunately.
Best way is to try and avoid getting resistance in the first place.
And to be fair, that's one of the reasons why we do keep, and I sound a bit harping on all the time about it, but whenever I'm talking about fluke, we just keep talking about making sure that you're right product, right time, right stage of fluke, and it's really vitally important. And all this that we've talked about tonight about testing is gearing up for that as well. It's absolutely perfect for it, because, you know, we want these products to use forever, and it's difficult to control fluke without triclobendazole. So find out whether you have, and if you have, unfortunately you won't be able to use it again, or it won't work as effectively as what you think it might work, or it used to do.
Thank you, John and Guy. So another one might be for Rosie. Can you see evidence of fluke in the faeces of an infected animal?
So if an animal has adult fluke established in its liver, then we can detect evidence microscopically, but there's no telltale signs, i.e., you know, like tapeworm segments or lovely little orange dots or something like that that make it clear that they're infected. Unfortunately, it's a microscopic exam, so you have to collect the samples, produce a mix, and look under the microscope.
Thank you. So a question from Stephen. What percentage of livers are condemned typically? I did see that somewhere and I can't remember what it was. I think that might be on the NADIS website. I've seen that somewhere. I can do a quick Google. And then second one, might also need a quick Google. Can we see a picture of a mud snail?
Got one here. I've got one here. I've got one for you. Just give me a minute. I'll just share the screen. Just give me a
In your hand. I was going to say I've got one as well.
In answer to your percentage,
just ready for you.
Ah, there we go. They're tiny.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, one of these speakers that we had that was specialists was a PhD student, and he'd mapped a farm to find the snails, to see if there were any snails there and where they were, and then which ones had got evidence of fluke in them, and then which of those had any evidence of fluke triclobendazole resistance. So he'd spent a lot of time trailing about trying to find tiny little snails like this, and it was surprising different areas of the farm, you know, which did have them. The main thing was the mud rather than water.
Hopefully that answers your questions, Stephen. Oh, Rosa, did you say you found out about the abattoir?
Yeah, and the abattoir thing is quite variable, as you can imagine, based on time of year. So it can range anywhere from sort of 8% right up to 30% on any given day, depending on the time of year. So obviously, if there's a huge fluke problem starting in lambs in sort of October, November, and you're selling lambs dead weight, then there might be quite a lot of condemnations. And again, that varies throughout the country. So a Welsh abattoir might be different from a Lancashire abattoir, but I guess the Devon abattoir probably tells you what's going on in Nidderdale.
Thank you. And then there was a couple regarding the app, Kate and Carol. So John was asking, is the app available outside of the group? And then Stephen said, what's the name of the app? So a bit of interest on the
yeah, it was just like a test app. It isn't a commercial product as such yet. I don't know if it might turn into one. I think that was why they wanted to sort of, you know, test out to see what was important for people. I think there are various things that do have some of the features, but nothing that have all the features that ours had. And yeah, it's only available to the people in the groups at the moment, and you're not sure whether anything like that, you know, it will be available in its form as it is. But maybe there'll be app creators who will, you know, take something from this research and do something.
Yeah. Thank you. Does Fluke affect fish differently? Does anyone know the answer to that one?
That's been a bit of a debate in our project. There's the votes highest for the textiles as being the most resilient so far. We've had 2 or 3 reportings that the textiles are not as vulnerable. But I don't know if, well, I don't, you know, I'm not a vet. I don't know whether it's real or not, but that's some farmer observations.
There is certainly other parasite resistant genetics, so it doesn't rule out Fluke. That's not one that's commercially available in the in sort of the EBVs. However, I would say if you've got sheep with compromised livers, so say you've got texels and you're feeding them copper, or some like giving them high levels of copper and it's compromising their liver, or you've got issues with using dirty needles and there's liver abscesses, and compromises to the liver mean that an animal could be could have a worse infection because the liver isn't 100% before you start.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything at that point? John or Guy? Do you know of anything? No. Okay. Next question. So this is cattle related. How good is pour on, fluke and worm for cattle at housing?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, of course, yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, it'll do a job. It will not kill all stages of fluke. Your pour on cattle wormers and flukicides, I should say, in conjunction with wormers, will kill down to, depending on which one you use, probably 7 to 8 weeks approximately. So anything below 7 to 8 weeks that's still in them at the time of treatment will grow to become adults in your cattle. And there's a bit of a stress on that one really, because you house your animals and you're feeding those animals and you're also feeding the fluke that's in those animals if you don't kill all the fluke off. So there's 2 ways of looking at that. Either you could wait a couple of weeks. Yeah, you could wait a couple of weeks and do it with a drench, ideally. I know it's difficult doing drench. I actually did it last year for the first time ever. Fortunately enough, if you've got a crush, then it's a darn sight easier. So you can either wait 2 weeks and do it with that, or if you treat them as you bring them in with the pour on, you will have to do something later on in the housing season to kill any of the fluke that are still left in there.
Thank you, John. Did you want to add anything, Guy?
It was just really sort of, John covered it there really, as you've got a choice really. If you're sort of treating when you bring them in, you're going to miss out fluke for a while and have to go in and retreat. But if you leave them for your 5, 6, 7 weeks, you've got to consider the amount of damage that will be done in the meantime by the fluke before they get treated. So it's that balance, isn't it, of trying to do a proper job and making sure you kill fluke as early as you can really, but don't miss any out.
Yeah. Thank you. This was my own question actually. Just wondered what the typical cost for blood testing is. So for these, obviously the farmers that were involved in your project, Kate, I imagine it was paid for by the project. So when they were testing routinely for however many weeks, was that I imagine that bit was funded. But if a farmer wanted to do that himself, how much typically would that cost?
The lab analysis is fairly standard. There's BioBest are the main one who do most of the tests, but then we've been doing the fig leg counts with Liverpool as well. So I think it'll vary because we've obviously got prices for doing lots of samples, and then obviously for the blood sampling, there's the time for the vet's time and the vacutainers and that. So I think when I've asked vets, they've all sort of, it varies a bit obviously depending on their charges, but it's usually, well, it's so far I think it's been below £50 for both the it's been about £24 for the analysis and for the lab analysis, and then up to £50 for the time and the travel and the blood testing, and that's because it varies. But yeah, hopefully less than that when you're doing a lot of sampling, and a lot of people are doing it through their flock health groups. A lot of vets run flock health groups where you get a certain amount of blood testing and you get a certain amount of fig leg counting and analysis. So people have been able to make good use of that, and certainly recommend that. Rosie might say something about that.
Wow, you're getting an absolute steal for testing, because I looked at the prices of BioBest the other day and they were about £8 per sample lab analysis. So sort of totting it up in my head, I'm fairly quick at blood testing lambs. If you did 6 lambs and they came down in a trailer to the practice and it took 15 minutes a time, you're looking at sort of £70 really. So it's not cheap, but how much do you value your time and potentially not treating at the right time and the product that you're using?
Yeah, thank you. Donna, when dosing around the time of moving sheep, should the sheep be dosed and left on the current pasture rather than moved immediately? And if so, how long should they be left there for? Who wants to do that one?
I don't mind.
I can answer that if you want.
Oh, go on. Yeah, you'll be super nice.
Put them on current pasture and leave them there as long as you possibly can do, as far as I'm concerned. No doubt about it. And that goes for worming as well. The one thing we do want to stress more than anything is do not dose and move onto new pasture, because it's an absolute disaster and it just drives resistance. So yeah, put them onto pasture as long as you can do. With worms, we say about 4 or 5 days if you can do. and then you can move them after that. But with Fluke, I don't really know, because it all depends on whether you're certainly with quarantine, you don't want to be doing that, do you? You want to leave it as long as possible, but yeah, put them back on dirty pasture as long as you can do.
Is that somebody?
Yeah, I've unmuted. Sorry. The question I put on about new products, I actually didn't mean it to go privately to Christine. I meant it for everybody. I must have clicked on Christine's name by accident, so that was why.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So we've not seen that. So if you want to ask.
The question was, is there anybody out there, any of these companies out there looking at new forms of the triclobendazole or anything like that to kill young Fluke? Obviously with resistance and all that kind of thing. Are they trying to find new products?
Yeah, I would say there's probably about, and I'm not going to get on my high horse about this with this one. There's probably about 3 or 4 companies in the you know, that we or you buy products off that invest money back into new products. But just to give you a bit of an idea on how long that takes to go through, we have a product called Solvix on the market nowadays. It's been on the market for about 10 years. That product took 25 years from when they actually found the active ingredient to put in a bottle on the shelf, and probably about whatever it costed, millions and millions of pounds. So whilst we're looking at them, we might have lots of different molecules that are out and about, but there's no guarantee of getting them to the market quickly. And if it takes us another 25 years to get another wormer on the market, you probably see the same with Flucicide and so on and so forth. So that's why it's really key to make sure we swap those products all the time until something does come along.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it for the questions that are on the chat. And I'm aware we're sort of 15 minutes over. Does anyone else want to wave their hand at us if they want to ask something, or just unmute yourself and ask away? Is everyone happy? No one has any other burning questions to ask? I'm sure if you do have something that you think about later, just send it through to myself or Kate or Carol, and we can pass those on to Rosie or Guy or John, and they might be able to answer those if you do come up with something. So I think if everyone's happy, just all I need to do is say a big thank you to our speakers. So thank you to John and Guy, thank you to Rosie, and thank you to Kate. And thumbs up. So yeah, and thank you all very much for joining. This, I should have said at the beginning, and I totally forgot, this has been recorded, so if there was anything that you missed or you wanted to listen to again, you will be able to do that